بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما نافعا. MashaAllah, I will start with some introductory points and then I'll hand it off to our brother Aamir. He will, inshallah, carry on with the majority of this presentation. And he will discuss the legal aspect. He's our legal expert. MashaAllah, may Allah accept his services. He has contributed extensively in preparing the will kit that is available in this masjid. And so, inshallah, we can benefit from him from the legal aspect, because the legal and the Islamic aspect of wills and inheritance is intertwined. We cannot separate the two in this country, as we will realize. And this is why the emphasis of understanding both aspects. So, inshallah, I'll try to discuss, remind ourselves and emphasize the Islamic aspect of inheritance of wills, and then our brother Aamir, inshallah, will continue with the legal aspect. First and foremost, mashallah, it's very nice to see all of you here. This matter is a very serious matter. The fact that you are here is a sign that you are serious about your deen. You keep your deen important. It is important to you, because this matter is a very serious matter in the religion. And this is why what I want to emphasize first, so that we understand the importance of this. First and foremost, because this matter is related to our wealth, we should understand in our deen, as those who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as our creator. We believe in the religion of Islam. We believe in all the prophets and the message that was brought to human beings by all the prophets. And this message was common in relation to this aspect too, the aspect of our wealth, the money that we own, and not just money, property, anything else that we own. We must understand, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes this very clear in the Quran. Allah says in Surah Al-Hadid, وَأَنْفِقُوا مِمَّا جَعَلَكُمْ مُسْتَخْلَفِينَ فِيهِ. Allah says, and spend from which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made you, O human beings, mustakhlafin. Mustakhlafin means representatives, or like vicegerents. This is another translation. Istikhlaf means to appoint someone in your place, right? Someone who stands in another's place, takes their place. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, spend from that wealth which He has made you a khalifa, a representative in this wealth. Who are we representing in this wealth? In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, this wealth, you are just a khalifa, a representative. You are representing Allah in this wealth. This wealth belongs to Him. We must understand this. This is absolutely important. The majority of violations that are committed in relation to our wealth is because people assume that it's mine. I could do what I want with it. This is totally against the Quran, against the teachings of our religion. Allah says, spend from that which you have been made a representative, a caretaker, a vicegerent, a khalifa in. جَعَلَكُمْ مُسْتَخْلَفِينَ فِيهِ, in that wealth. and that wealth actually belongs to Allah. Right in the opening ayat of Surah Al-Baqarah, right, when we recite Surah Al-Baqarah on the first page, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ وَيُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةِ وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. The last part of the ayah, and the true believers are those who spend from what we have given them. We have provided them. So this is extremely important to understand. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made us a khalifa in our money. We are not true owners of it. When we understand this, this is not my money, this is Allah's money, who has given it to me specifically. In other words, our ownership of our money is temporary. We're not true owners. Yes, in Islam, we're considered to be legal owners of this wealth. We are responsible for this wealth that we have. But this responsibility has been given by Allah with the wealth He has given us. That I've made you, O Abdullah, the owner of this wealth. I want to see what you do with it. And this is why on the Day of Judgment, from the 5 questions we will all be asked, the Prophet ﷺ says that no one will be able to move from their spot until they're asked 5 questions. 2 of those are in relation to wealth. مِنْ أَيْنَ اكْتَسَبَهُ وَفِيمَ أَنْفَقَهُ. Where did he earn his wealth from? And where did he spend it? If this wealth was ours, if it belonged to us, if it was because of my hard work, right, and my education and my knowledge that this money belongs to me, I could do what I want with it, then why would Allah ask us on the Day of Judgment where we earned it from? We could say this is mine. Allah would not have the right to ask us. If it's my wealth and someone else tells me in this world, like, what are you doing with your wealth? Right? Give this person this much and this person this much. We would say to him, this is my money. You have no right to say anything in my money. But on the Day of Judgment, Allah will ask us, where did you earn this money from? And where did you spend it? And Allah will have a right to do this because it's His. It belongs to Him. He is the true owner. Allah says, لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Everything in the heavens and the earth and whatever is in between, it belongs to Allah. He is the true owner. So we must understand that wealth is actually the wealth that we possess. We are the owners of. We are temporary owners. We're not true owners. Allah is the true owner of this wealth. And thus, He gives us commands related to this wealth that are appropriate. Because He has a right to. He is the owner of this wealth. So once we understand this and our heart accepts this fully, right, then it will become easy for us to do everything that He tells us to do. To give zakat, we'll give zakat. It's His. He's asking me for 2.5%, I'll give zakat. He's telling me to help the poor, I'll help the poor. He's telling me to spend money here, I'll spend money here. Because it's His, right? I'm giving it, and Allah is telling me to give it. His wealth that He has given me, I will have no problem with it. Likewise, in inheritance, the distribution of the inheritance, when this wealth belongs to Allah, what actually happens is, when a person is actually not upon death, even before death, right? Not after we pass away, even before we pass away, for most people, they go through this stage called maradul maut. Maradul maut meaning they're afflicted with such an illness that with relative certainty, in most circumstances, unless something miraculous happens, right? Like some sheikh came and put his hand over him, and miraculously his cancer was cured, or he did some ruqya, or something happened. It's possible, but in normal circumstances, this illness will most certainly lead to his death. And he has a very short period of time, a couple of days, maybe a couple of months. The doctors tell him that you will probably die now. You have 6 months to live. So these type of illnesses, it could be cancer, it could be other illnesses where most probably a person will die. That illness is called maradul maut. A person is still alive, but he's going through this illness which will most likely lead to his death. The scholars say at this time, a person loses the authority to use his wealth the way he wants. Like that will that we had, we can use I'm not saying that this is allowed, but Right now, we can use our wealth the way we want, however much we want, wherever we want. Yes, we will be accountable, but we have that authority right now as owners of this wealth. But in that moment, what we call maradul maut, a person loses the right to now spend his money according to his will. He cannot spend on charity anymore. There's a hadith the Prophet ﷺ said, like one of you, they continue to procrastinate in giving charity. They delay it, they delay it, they delay it until they reach the last moments of their life, maradul maut. And then they say, oh, give such and such a poor person this much money, give such and such a person this much money, give masjid this much money, give this institution, and they start giving charity. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, whereas this wealth is not his anymore, it belongs to his heirs. In other words, any charity that he would do at that time, it will not be counted. Like legally, you cannot enforce that. Islamically, it will not count unless it's within 1/3 of his wealth. To that much, it could be carried out, but beyond that, he has no right to touch his money now in optional acts of charity. So we actually lose the right to utilize our wealth in optional acts of charity even before we die. But until we're alive, the rules of inheritance do not apply. We're still considered owners of this wealth, and the distribution of inheritance does not occur, nor does the will apply until we pass away. And this is why, technically, Islamically, they say a wasiyat is a transaction that a person does with his wealth that will apply after his death, not in our lifetime. So I might insert some secondary or related discussions as I'm talking, as they come to my mind. That some people, they ask this question that, can I distribute my inheritance while I'm alive? No. Inheritance doesn't apply while we are alive. I can gift my money. I can gift it as a gift to whoever I want, including my family members, but I cannot apply the rules of inheritance to my wealth while I'm alive. So they say that I'll give my son 1 share and I'll give my daughter 2 shares according to the Islamic inheritance. No, that applies after we die, after we pass away. That distribution does not apply while we are alive. Actually, when we are alive, if we are to distribute our wealth to our children specifically, they should be given equally. The hadith prohibits preferring one child over the other. The son and the daughter should be given equally, unless there are specific circumstances due to which one child is preferred. For example, there's a disability, they need to be assisted greater, or there's a greater need, one is in poverty, they need to be assisted more, or one is serving the parents, and because of this, they want to give this child as like an appreciation for the services he is rendering, and other children are not providing these services. These are possible reasons, but in normal circumstances, this distribution in the lifetime must be equal amongst one's children. One cannot prefer one child over the other. This will be injustice. This is like if our children are growing up, and if I buy something for $100 for my daughter, and for my son I get something for $10. That's not fair. Right? I'm preferring one child over the other. This is a type of abuse that I'm committing with my children, that I'm preferring one over the other and how much I spend upon them. So this is not allowed. But the point I was making is that the distribution of inheritance applies after we die. So the reality of inheritance, Islamically, the way we look at it and we understand it, is that as soon as I die, until I'm alive, I'm considered the owner, the legal owner of this wealth, and I'm accountable as to how I spend it. As soon as I die, I'm no longer alive. My ownership ends upon my death. I am no longer the owner of that money. If I'm not the owner, who becomes the owner? I leave behind $1 million. May Allah accept. I leave behind $1 million, and as soon as I die, I'm no longer the owner of that money. Who do you think the owner is? Where does it go, the ownership? Naam. Anyone? To the heirs. But even before that, it goes back to Allah. This is something important should understand. Allah becomes the owner once again. Allah was the owner before He gave us that money. As soon as we die, Allah becomes the owner. And this happens immediately. It's not like it takes a while. It doesn't have to go through any transfer of ownership or legal process. Allah becomes the owner immediately. As soon as my soul comes out of the body, Allah is the Malik al-Haqiqi, the true owner, who was the true owner even while I was alive. But He gave me temporary ownership. As soon as I die, Allah becomes the owner again. And what does Allah do with that wealth? يُوصِيكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي أَوْلَادِكُمْ لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. If you pick up Surah An-Nisa, Allah has already told us what He does with that wealth. And these ayat of Surah An-Nisa, and there are other ayat also related, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He commands you, يُوصِيكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي أَوْلَادِكُمْ, in relation to your children. The context behind the revelation of these ayat were where children were deprived of inheritance. There was something wrong that happened from the practices of Jahiliyyah, and the daughters were not given their share, and the male family members would take all the inheritance. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed these ayat in that incident, and this is why the ayat speaks initially about the shares that the children will receive. But eventually Allah speaks about all those people who will get a share, meaning they become the owners of this wealth. In other words, Allah has already told us that when you pass away, the wealth is mine now, it comes back to me, and I have already allocated this wealth to certain individuals from your family. And Allah has told us that in the Quran, that the wife will get 1/8, 12.5% if you have children. If I pass away, the wife gets 12.5% of this wealth, that's hers. So immediately after I pass away, it's like the wealth goes back to Allah's ownership solely, and Allah says 12.5% is your wife's. She becomes the owner. So in that same moment, as soon as I die, Allah becomes the owner, and Allah gives that ownership to my wife. The children, they get the remainder if there are no other relatives. Then the sons, the daughters, they will get the remainder. The son will get 2 shares and the daughter will get 1 share. And this distribution is decided by Allah. It's like Allah says, I give your sons this much from your wealth. As soon as you die, I gave your daughters this much. If there are parents, your mother gets this much, your father gets this much. If there are no children, your brothers and sisters get this much. If there are grandchildren and no children, your grandchildren will get. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already decided who will get my wealth as soon as I die. That means as soon as I die, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala resumes ownership over that wealth and gives it to them automatically. It's theirs. Not even the second day. The first moment after I die, it's their money. It's their property. You know, people have this, that why are you talking about inheritance right now? The person just passed away. You know, sometimes this is considered to be like taboo in our culture. That when a person passes away, you can't talk about inheritance for like 6 months or 2 years, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already given that wealth on the first day. On the next moment, He has said this wealth is this person's. Why are we holding on to it? It's like we're saying Allah gave that wealth to this person, but we don't want to give it right now. Like, what right do we have to stop Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from giving this wealth to so and so? Our job is now to realize through the shares of inheritance whose money this is, not who deserves this money. It's already theirs. We just need to figure out now that who does it belong to? Oh, 12.5% the wife's? Okay, we need to give it to her. It's hers. No ifs, ands, or buts. The son, this much percent is his. Okay, how could we give his share? It belongs to him now. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given it to him. This is what the scholars refer to as milkul jabri. Milkul jabri means forced ownership. In other words, after I pass away, my heirs become the owner of this wealth, whether they like it or not. Like, even if you say, no, I don't want it, it's still yours. You have to take it. Right? I'm saying this, especially in our Indian subcontinent. A lot of times, like the daughters or the sisters, after the father passes away, for example, they go to the daughters and say, they try to say that, oh, we offered the share to them. And they go to the daughters or sisters if they deserve shares, and they say, this much is your share, do you want it? And the culture is such that the daughters automatically, they say, no, we don't want it, because if they take it, then they will be disgraced in society. That, oh my God, they took money, right? What did they do for this money, or some form of disgrace in society. So they're shamed into saying, no, we don't want it. And they will come to people and say, we offered the daughters shares, we gave the sisters shares, but they said no, so we kept it. Islamically, this is not valid. It's still not halal to take that money. Even if the daughters say no, it's not valid legally, Islamically, to refuse to take that money, because Allah is giving it. They have no right to say no. Allah is saying, you are the owner. It's already yours. You just need to take possession of it now. So they must. So the scholars mention this in the fatwa, in the legal verdicts. If this happens, this is not valid, and the daughter will still be the owner of that wealth, even if the sons took it. It's not theirs. It's still the daughter's. They must give it to her. The only way this would be valid is if they actually give possession of that wealth to the daughter, to the sisters, or whoever. They take possession of it. It's theirs. And then they say, okay, I'm giving it to you willingly. And who will do that? After they take possession of it, no one will give the money, right? They will keep it, of course. And this is why no one does this. So, just bear with me. Sometimes I will, he's saying like, hurry up, I'm waiting. Inshallah. But this, sometimes I get very passionate about this topic. And another reason is because of the mass violations that are committed in relation to the wealth of inheritance, right? It's very sad, the situation of the ummah, when you are exposed to what actually happens, right? It's unfortunate. So again, this is why Mufti Shafi Sahib Rahimahullah says, because this is explicitly mentioned in the Quran, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says precisely that 12.5%, this is an example, 1/8, if there were no children, she gets 25%. That 12.5% or 25% of this wealth is your wife's after you die. It's hers. The mother gets, for example, 1/6 or 1/3. The father gets 1/3, right? The sons get this much. And there's a precise, exact stipulation down to the last dollar. When you calculate the percentage, it will go down to the last dollar who owns it. There's no ambiguity. And this is so clear in the Quran that Mufti Shafi Sahib Rahimahullah says, if someone was to like intentionally not apply this distribution because they're not happy with it, and they take more than what they own, or they give less to someone, an heir of what they own, and they know how much the Quran has given, but they don't give that. They know the Quran has given them this much, but they take more than that. Like this happens in this country a lot, right? They know that the Quran has given them this much, but they're not happy with it. They will take more. And they do this. Mufti Shafi Sahib says, I fear that this person will leave the fold of Islam by doing this. Why? Because they are unhappy with an explicit ayat of the Quran. And to reject one ayat of the Quran is an act of disbelief. So if they're doing this because they don't like what the Quran says, they don't like the Quranic distribution, this might lead to, Wallahu a'lam, Allah knows best, but this is how severe the matter is. Because there's no ambiguity in this regard. It's very clear, this much is given to so and so. And if someone doesn't like this and they say, I don't like the Quranic distribution. They won't say it, but that's the way they behave. I want what the government gives me. I don't like what Allah is giving me. You are denying an explicit ayat of the Quran. So it could be. Now, if a person is doing this out of heedlessness, out of ignorance, then we would say that their iman is intact. But if they are doing this out of rejection of this ayah, and they don't believe in this ayah, then it could be a matter of belief and disbelief. This is how dangerous the matter is. The Prophet ﷺ says in a hadith, right, that إن الرجل لا يعمل والمرأة بطاعة الله 60 سنة ثم يحضرهما الموت فيضاران في الوصية فتجم لهما النار. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu narrates this hadith. It comes in the Sunan of Imam Abu Dawud also, that a man or a woman, they obey Allah. They live their life in the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لا يعمل بطاعة الله. They are in the obedience of Allah. MashaAllah, like religious. And this is why I'm emphasizing this, because this matter, even extremely who we would assume to be religious people, are committing vast violations, mass violations, gross violations in this regard. Even people who are considered to be religious. The hadith says that a person, he obeys, he worships Allah, a man or a woman worshipping Allah for 60 years of their life, 60 sanatan. Basically their whole life, they're worshipping Allah, obeying Him. And in the last moments of their life, they cause harm to one of the heirs in their will. Meaning they make such a will that deprives a shareholder of their share. Like, so for example, they make a legal will and say, I want all my money to go to my daughter, or all my money to be given to my son, and no one else gets anything. And because of that will, the son takes all the money. They have, through their will, deprived the shareholder from their rightful share. If someone, and then they do this, the Prophet ﷺ says, they do this. I would add to this, and this leads to the importance of having a will in this land, in this country that we live in, that people, they die without wills, without a legal will, and they leave behind properties, excessive wealth. And because they don't have a will, it allows individuals to take more than what they should be taking Islamically, because there's no will. And I usually give this example. A very close friend of mine, right? His father passed away, and actually he had a will, and he will probably speak about it too. He had a will, but it so happened, a legal will, it so happened that his first wife passed away in his lifetime, and he remarried. And after he remarried, he was living with his second wife. He didn't update his will. He didn't make a new one and update it. And he passed away. The courts did not accept the old will. So he passed away without a legal will, and that allowed some family members to take a share more than what they deserved. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. This individual, he left behind multi-million-dollar properties, right? And an individual from the family, they were able to, through the courts, because there was no will, acquire a huge share of that inheritance that they did not, Islamically, it was not theirs. And other family members came and complained about it. And this individual was considered to be very pious in society, amongst the community. MashaAllah, like very pious and righteous, and making effort amongst the community in religious matters, religious efforts. But when it came to this, they were not ready to take what Islam gave them. And they went to court and took whatever they could, right, legally. And it's like my friend was saying, it's just like they ate a part of the pig, not all of it. They didn't eat the whole pig, they just ate a part of it. What's the difference, right? So the hadith says, I want to finish the hadith, that in the last part of their life, they commit a violation in relation to their will. So even if a person doesn't leave a will behind, and because of not leaving a will, some shareholders are deprived of their share, we are responsible. Why didn't I leave a will behind? knowing that if I don't, there's a possibility that my inheritance might not be distributed Islamically. This becomes a wajib on me, that I must leave a will. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ says, if there should be one day or one night or 2 days or 2 nights should not pass in a state where a person has something to make a will about, and he should not allow 1 or 2 days to pass without having a will by his bedside. And so many people think, a will? I'm just 25 years old, right? I'm just 35, 40. Right? I still have a long life to live. Why should I be worried about a will right now? No, we need to be worried about a will right now, right? Because the hadith says a person, if they have something to make a will about, will regarding, they should not spend a day or 2 days without their will written beside them, right? That we should have a will ready, right? In other words, we should be prepared for death by our will being prepared, so that we know and we're satisfied that if I die tomorrow, the people after me will know Islamically how to distribute my estate. And there will be no dispute and no questions about it. And this is why we could say this actually becomes an obligation upon anyone who is leaving behind, like especially those who are leaving behind extensive wealth, properties, a larger estate, that it's an obligation to leave behind a will. And if a person doesn't, and because of that, their wealth is misappropriated, they may be held accountable. This hadith may apply. So the last part of the hadith says, a person, a man and a woman, they worship Allah for 60 years in the obedience of Allah, and they do something wrong regarding their will, and they die, and تَجْرِبُ لَهُمَ النَّارِ, the fire of Jahannam becomes wajib on them. Their 60 years of ibadah will not help them. Just imagine. Why? Because this violation was committed at the time where he didn't have any way to make up for it. No tawbah, because he passes away after that. There's no way to give back the shares to the people who were deprived of their shares. So dying in this state is extremely dangerous. A person's whole life of worship may be irrelevant. Because of him, someone is not getting the wealth that they deserve. This is a violation that we are committing. So this shows the importance of leaving behind a will, and the importance of understanding the distribution that Islam has determined, and that we should take this matter seriously, right? And we should not be satisfied and complacent with the fact that I'm practicing other aspects of my religion, and this aspect I'm neglecting, right? Because like I was saying, right, even religious individuals, unfortunately, have neglected this aspect of religion. There was just a brother, I don't know if he's here, he was talking to me after Salat al-Maghrib, and he was mentioning how there was a house that was allocated in their lifetime to one of the daughters, and it was her house all the way through. And then when the father passed away, the other members, they distributed that house as inheritance, whereas it was given to her, it was her house, but they distributed and took shares of that house too, and they committed this violation. And he was telling me that these are religious people, but they're not ready to accept the ruling. When it comes to money, Islam is not important anymore. Allah and His Rasul are not important anymore. This is the problem. And like, if you don't read so much Quran, you might not be accountable for it. If you don't read a lot of nawafil, if you don't give a lot of charity, you will not be held accountable. You will not be sinful. But a single dollar we take of someone that doesn't belong to us may take us to Jahannam. Like these violations that are committed, we know the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the hadith al-Muflis, right? That when people violate each other's wealth, and this is a prime example of violation of people's wealth, when the inheritance is not given appropriately, and people don't, the true inheritors do not get their shares, that this is wealth that is unlawfully taken from them, right? And we know that when a person comes on the Day of Judgment, the Prophet ﷺ said there will be a person with mountains of reward, of good deeds that they did. Mountains. A person will think, MashaAllah, this is Shaykh Fulan, right? Buzrug Fulan, and did so many good actions. But no one knew that Shaykh Fulan did not give the share of inheritance to his sister, or he took money and he did not pay it back, or he usurped someone's land, right? In my country, this is so widespread, right? Many people who live here, they have property back home, right? Even that property needs to be administered accordingly, right? And there is so many violations that are being committed in land. Like in my village alone, when I go to my village and I talk about this to people, he says, Mufti Sahib, don't talk about this. There's probably no one in this village who has not taken someone else's land. This is how bad it is, right? Like everyone's involved. Everyone just takes whatever they can, right? On a personal note, even like my personal family, right? And like there was a piece of land that was sold, and it was only on the brothers and sisters. They were on the title deed of the land, but when it was sold, they realized that this land was coming up from the forefathers, right? It hasn't been distributed amongst, and this happens a lot because people don't distribute inheritance when someone passes away. They don't allocate the shares; they just leave it, and this happened for multiple generations. And then eventually, now they're worried that who is the shareholder? How should we distribute this land? So they went to Darul Ifta. They asked the question, and they gave all the details of when the land, who initially owned it, the great grandfather, and it was coming down. So they worked out everything, and they determined that there are 26 owners of this land, not just you 5 brothers and sisters. There are 26 owners of this land. They have a share in this land because their share was not given to them from the great grandfather, and their shares continued to be distributed amongst their inheritors. So there are 26 now. I think there's more now because some of them passed away. So their children now have a share in that land. So it's probably more than 30 now. And as people pass away, the shares continue to distribute and increase. So they actually calculated, and they tried, and these people now were all over the world, living in England, in Panama, here in Canada. They had to look for everyone and give them their shares. But alhamdulillah, they actually did it. And people were like, this issue actually came up in like a local paper. Can you imagine like what's so special about that? Like if you gave me money, right, it belonged to you, and I give it back to you. Is this something to praise? In the papers, mashallah, Abdullah gave Zayd's money back to Zayd. People will say, like, what's so special about that? It was Zayd's money and Abdullah gave it back to Zayd. Why is he being praised? This is the state of affairs we are in. So they gave the shares to whoever owns them, and the local Gujarati paper wrote about it. That so-and-so person in such and such a village, he actually went and distributed the shares to 26 shareholders. Right? Like this is now, a hadith comes to mind. The Prophet ﷺ said, there will come a time of such dishonesty and such like violations of each other's wealth. There will come a time when people will say, if you want to meet an honest man, go to such and such a town. There's an honest man there, a man who deals with things very honestly. Are we not living in this time now? Like it's hard to find honest people now, right? So, like I said, the seriousness of this distribution, right? I want to quickly now fast forward to just the aspects of the Islamic will and distribution before we get into the legal, inshallah. So this will that was prepared, alhamdulillah, it was in consideration of both the Islamic way to distribute wealth as well as the legal considerations were also made so that it becomes both Islamically compliant as well as legally, right? And it's a very basic will. There may be individuals may have unique scenarios that they would have to actually go to an expert, a lawyer, right, to discuss the issue and how to modify if they need to. It's not like a will that fits everyone's needs, right? That should be kept into consideration, right? Kept in mind. It's a very basic will, but it covers the distribution of a person's estate after they pass away, Islamically also. So basically, the a person's estate, right? That is what we refer to as his inheritance. Islamically, what is included in one's estate, which will be distributed after he passes away. In Islam, everything that a person owns is part of his estate. Everything that he owns, down to the last spoon. Down to the last spoon. It's part of one's inheritance, right? And this, I always mention this story too of Mufti Taqi Sahib and Mufti Shafi Sahib himself. Mufti Taqi Sahib, may Allah preserve him, the great scholar of our time. He mentions that once I went into to serve my father, Mufti Shafi Sahib, the author of Ma'arif al-Quran. I went to serve him. I brought a cup of tea with a spoon, and I gave it to him in his room. And after we finished, the spoon was on one side. I took the cup back, took it back to the kitchen, and I forgot the spoon there. After a short while, I'm not sure, I can't remember the exact details, but my father called me, and he was displeased with me. He was kind of angry, and he said, "Why did you leave this spoon in this room?" And I just forgot it. And he wanted to emphasize this. This is why he got a little angry. And he said, "Why did you not take this spoon back? You should have taken it back, because I have written in my will that whatever is in my room, I own. I am the owner of. Whatever is in my room, I am the owner of. And therefore that will be part of my inheritance estate, and it will be distributed. If I died right now and people found this spoon in my room, they would think this is mine, and it's not mine. And like that would be something I don't own, that will be part of my inheritance, and I don't own it. Someone else does." So he was worried about even one spoon being incorrectly allocated to his ownership. Today, if we think about ourselves, everything that we own, do we know who owns it in our home? Please do not go back home and start fighting about this issue. It's just to understand, like we go back and say, okay, who owns the sofa? Whose bed is this, right? What about all the kitchenware? I've actually discussed it with my family, right? But this is actually important. I've seen with my eyes, again, back in my village, when the distribution was taking place of the home, the family members got together and they got all the kitchenware, pots and pans, and they put it together, and they were deciding who's going to get this. There was actually like a slight dispute regarding the kitchenware, right? So these also are matters that might be a matter of dispute. Who is going to get the furniture? Who owns it? The car? Everything else in the home, right? So down to the last spoon, we should be clear who owns what. Because if I don't know, if the family members don't know who is the true owner, how will I know what is my estate? How will I know what is part of my inheritance if I'm not sure what I own and what I don't own? And if I pass away tomorrow, does my family know everything that I own, so that they could say, okay, this is his inheritance and we have to distribute this however we need to distribute it? They won't know. They will question, does he own this or not? Did he own this or not? People have homes, and they're not even sure who owns that home. Oh, that I'm paying, she's paying also. Okay, you ask them, okay, who's the owner? Well, and we're both paying. Our names are on the title deed. So does that mean you own it 50-50? But he's not sure, right? Well, I pay more, she pays less. So if she's paying less, does that mean she owns less? I don't know. They haven't discussed it, right? So these matters must be clarified in our lifetime, that who owns what. I'm not going to tell you how to do this. You have to do this on your own, right? This is your responsibility. This is my responsibility for my wealth. to figure out the ownership. So this is first and foremost. Everything that I own down to the last spoon is part of my estate. And the distribution will apply to that too. We must understand this. The distribution, Islamic inheritance, goes through like 5 parts. So whatever is in my estate, it goes through like 5, you could say 5 stages, and they're all in the will kit. Number 1 is that I'm trying to like finish this quickly now. Number 1, you will have to get more details. You can find them in the will kit also. Number 1 is that my whole estate will be used to take care of my burial expenses. Right? Nowadays, burial expenses are extensive. $8,000, $10,000, right? Sometimes, depending whether the person has a plot or not. So, but the whole estate will be used. Whole estate meaning that if I left behind, for example, $8,000, all of my property altogether, $8,000. That's all I had. And the burial costs $8,000. All that money will be used for the burial. Nothing will be given to anyone. No one inherits. Right, so the whole estate is utilized to pay for the burial costs, right? And there are guidelines also in the will kit as to what costs, and there shouldn't be unnecessary extravagance in the burial costs, but because those cannot be applied to the estate. But the average cost of the burial will be applied to the whole estate. Once the burial costs are taken care of, number 1. Number 2 is all remaining debts will be paid off from the whole estate. All my debts, if I leave behind any debts. This comes to also a very important issue. We must record or have some record of the money we owe or the money we are owed. Because if I die today and only I know and the person who I borrowed money from knows that I owe them money and no one else knows from the family, and I die, and tomorrow he comes to my family and says, oh, he owed me $10,000, can you pay? And they say, we don't know. This actually happened, all right, to a friend. He actually said that this person came up to me after my father passed away and he said, your father owed me $5,000. Right? And anyone can come up and say this, right? And the son was saying, how do I know? Do you have any proof? He said, no, it's just like a verbal transaction and there's no proof of it. And the son actually said, well, sorry, I can't help you. And we know the warning of a person who passes away with debt on him, and he doesn't pay off his debts, or he doesn't leave behind sufficient funds to pay off his debts, or proof of his debts that need to be paid off. So if that debt was not paid off, the person goes into his grave with a debt, and his matter is suspended until that debt is paid off. Wallahu a'lam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive him, have mercy on him. But this is a real issue, that people don't leave behind proof of debts. Even if someone owes me, there should be proof of this, so that if I pass away, they know, oh, we have to collect such and such money from such and such an individual. Because if I, for example, lent $10,000 to Zaid, and I passed away today, right, and there's no proof, how will my family members know that my $10,000 Zaid has? Whose money is that? The money that Zaid has. The heirs, it's their money, right? My wife's, my son, my daughter, it's their money, and they should be getting it. But they don't even know that Zaid has their money. And Zayd's not going to say anything. Zayd's going to say, mashallah, like he's dead. No one knows. I keep the money. If Zayd is, compliant, if he believes in Allah and His Rasul, Zayd would go to the family and say, oh, he lent me $10,000, here it is. Because that $10,000 is part of his estate, it needs to be given to his heirs. But if we left behind no proof of it, how could that be recovered? So that's also, so the debts will be paid off first. On step 2, all debts will be paid off, even if the whole estate is needed to pay all the debts off. So if I left behind a $50,000 debt, and my estate is $50,000 or $40,000, then there's no inheritance. All the money will be used to pay off the debts. Hopefully we don't die with a debt, right? Inshallah, may Allah protect us from falling into debt and dying in a state of debt. If we don't have any debts, then there's the 3rd step. The 3rd step is what we refer to as the Islamic wasiyat, where a person is allowed, this is from the grace of Allah and His mercy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, although He becomes the owner of this wealth after I die, He has actually given me permission, and it's like He's saying, Abdullah, I'll have mercy on you. That if you didn't give charity in your lifetime, you can write on your will that after I die, to the extent of 1/3 of my wealth, 33.33% of my wealth, give such and such a poor person, dig so many wells, give this masjid, give this extended family member because they are in need. And I could use 1/3 of that money for sadaqah, for charity, that I will get reward for. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is allowing me to use that 1/3 of my wealth. Although it's not mine, but after Allah did not have to, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it easy for us that if you didn't give sadaqah in your lifetime, you could use that 1/3 to give sadaqah and get reward. So that's what we refer to as the Islamic wasiyat. We cannot utilize that wealth for more than 1/3. Right? Any wasiyat will that says that give half of my wealth to such and such a masjid, not allowed. Only 1/3 will be given, not more than that. If someone says, I have a friend who was a very close friend, I want 50% of my wealth to be given to him after I die, not allowed. He will fall into that warning. A person who caused harm before he died, right? Only 33.33% will be allowed to be given, and beyond that, it's all inheritance. Right? So in 1/3, a person is allowed to make a wasiyat. Included in this is also leaving behind money within that 1/3 for any prayers that a person had to make up and they didn't make up. So fidya for one's prayers, one's fasting that they did not make up in their lifetime. If Hajj was fard on them and they didn't perform their Hajj, they can leave behind in their will that from my money, if it's within 1/3, Hajj should be performed so that my Hajj could be performed after me. I wasn't able to do it. So these leftover religious obligations towards Allah or charities, obligations towards others, like even if there are debts, well, debts are used before that, like we mentioned. But charities, we could utilize this 1/3. We don't have to. There's another discussion as to should we give this 1/3 in charity or not. Right. Generally, the rule is if the family members are in financial need, and most family members are now, then a person should not utilize that 1/3. Leave it for the family. Let them take the remainder, the whole estate, and distribute it amongst them. Because obviously, if we use that 1/3, they will be getting less. So if they use it, leaving it behind for the family, especially when they are in financial need and these difficult times, a person will also get the reward of sadaqah and taking care of one's family. Because he had the right to give that wealth to someone else, the 1/3, but he didn't. And he left it so that the family could take it. His sons, his daughters, his wife. So it's like he gave that to them optionally. Right? So he get reward for sadaqah as well as helping his family. So that 1/3 could be used or it could be left, and the remaining 2/3 or all of it, whatever is left behind, this is the 4th now, the distribution applies that the Quran has mentioned. Right? That the wife will get this much, the children would get this much, the sisters, brothers and sisters will get this much. That's after the wasiyat, the 1/3, whatever was written within it, after that is fulfilled, the remainder of the estate will be allocated to the remaining heirs, right? And we don't have time to go into heirs and their specific shares, how much they get, but the will has at the end an appendix, right? Where like the majority of the possible scenarios are written that if a person dies and they leave behind a wife and sons and daughters, how much the wife will get, how much the sons and daughters will get. If they will leave behind a wife and only daughters, how much they will get. Only sons, what will they get? A father and mother, what will they get? No sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, what will they get? All the scenarios have been mentioned in the will. So all that has been done for you, right? So you don't have to worry about that distribution, and your will already include it. And most probably, one of those scenarios will apply to a person, and even if it was taken to court, the court will say, okay, according to this scenario, this much should be given to this person, this much to this person, and this is what he wanted, right? So the court will only look at what did the deceased want, and that's written in our will. They don't care if it's Islamic or not Islamic. right? But obviously, we want the Islamic distribution. So it's according to the Quranic and Islamic distribution that the scenarios have been mentioned. And this way, that's the fourth part and final part. This is how a person's estate is distributed Islamically. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy. Forgive me for missing a lot, right? And whatever was said, make it enough for us to become active in this regard, right? One thing I forgot to mention, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where the Prophet ﷺ said, تَعَلَّمُوا الْفَرَائِض وَعَلِّمُوهَا النَّاسِ. The Prophet ﷺ says, learn the laws of inheritance and teach it to people. فَإِنَّهُ نِصْفُ الْعِلْمِ. Because this is half of Islamic knowledge. Imam Sufyan al-Thawri commenting on this, he said, what does it mean by nisful ilm? Right? Nisful ilm meaning because every human being, every believer, male or female, right, mature or immature, they're leaving behind wealth, it applies to them. There's no Muslim who the laws of inheritance would not apply to after we die, right? So, well, actually, this is, yeah, Nisful Ilm, or Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali says. Why was it called Nisful Ilm? Because, there are legal rulings that apply to us while we are alive, and legal rulings that will apply to us, meaning our estate, when we die. So half of the knowledge is when we are alive, and half of the knowledge is after we die. It is applicable to us in that sense. So in this way, and the Prophet ﷺ said, وَهُوَ يُنْسَى وَهُوَ أَوَّلُ شَيْءٍ يُنْزَعُ مِنْ أُمَّتِي. That this knowledge will be forgotten. And this will be the first thing that will be taken away from my ummah. Now, if we take the literal meaning of the hadith, I mean the knowledge will not remain. But the knowledge is everywhere. You can pull up the inheritance knowledge and books of inheritance on Google, and everyone can pull this knowledge up now. So the information exists, but Wallahu a'lam, this hadith could possibly mean when the Prophet ﷺ is saying this knowledge will be forgotten and it will be the first thing that will be taken away from the ummah, meaning this will be the first knowledge that this ummah will neglect, will stop acting upon. They will not care about inheritance anymore. And even though the knowledge is there, they won't care about it. And they won't distribute their wealth according to the teachings of Islam. So may Allah protect us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save us from any violations in relation to inheritance, and forgive us, right? Especially in relation to our wealth. The matter is very serious, right? Like I mentioned, that if we are clean and pure with our wealth, if we didn't do a lot of acts of charity, optional acts of worship, inshallah, we will not be accountable, right? But if we committed violations in wealth, no matter how much good deeds with it, Hajj, Umrah, all the fasting, all the Quran, but this, we will not be saved from this. Right? This may deplete all of our good actions. This is how serious the matter is. May Allah protect us. I'm very sorry for my brother Aamir. He's by saying, I'll come back the next day. No, this is, mashallah, again, we should appreciate his presence here. We know that people like him, people pay hundreds of dollars to take this legal advice. So don't be deceived just because we're getting it for free, because this is our nature, right? That when we get advice for free, we don't care. If I was to pay $500 to a lawyer to advise me about a will, do you think I won't care about his advice after paying $500? I would be extremely attentive, and I will do exactly what he tells me to do. Why? Because I paid for it, right? So this is our nature. Our nature should be that if it's advice important, no matter what, who is giving it, we should pay heed to it and be serious about it, and not be like those people, right? That who get free advice and they don't care about it. MashaAllah, he's providing it free of cost, but that doesn't decrease the importance of it. It's as important as if we were paying thousands of dollars to get this advice, right? The Prophet ﷺ, he was the greatest advisor. The Quran says, the Prophet ﷺ said, "La as'alukum alayhi ajra." I'm not taking any compensation from you for advising you. But the Prophet ﷺ's advice was the most important advice to all of mankind, right? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to take these advices, legal advices also seriously. آخر دعوانا الحمد لله.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Sorry, I'm sad. I promise I will try to keep it.
I don't know if they want a 2-minute break or something.
Yeah, that might make sense. We can have a quick break if that's what people want, to go to the washroom, get some water. I promise I will try to keep it quick. There's no chai, unfortunately. Okay. Okay. So the purpose of my section, yeah, go ahead. My part of this talk is just to go over the Canadian requirements for a will, right? Mufti Sahib talked about all of the Islamic aspects, right? And quite frankly, that's way more important for people like us, what he talked about. My portion of the talk is just how do we achieve what he discussed in our society today. And to do that, Mufti Sahib and I, we worked extensively to create what's called the Islamic Will Kit. It's pretty much, you print it out and it's fill in the blank, meaning it'll have a blank for your name. It'll have a blank for your children, for your spouse's names. You fill this out, you find 2 witnesses to sign, and alhamdulillah, you have a will, inshallah. It's as simple as that. So from my part of this discussion, there's just 3 things that I'd like you to take home, inshallah. One is that if you were to die without a will, the government does not take all of your money. I think that's a pretty common misconception in our society. The government will not take all of your money. It will go to your family members, but you will have no say in how much each person gets or how it gets divided. The second part is that a will is not difficult, especially in the sense that we have prepared it. We've made it so that it applies to probably 70 to 80% of the population. Right? If you're a business owner, if you have assets around the world, it becomes a little bit more complicated. But for most of the population, including myself, I've used the same template for myself. It's as simple as just printing it out and filling in the blanks. And the third part is that you do not need a lawyer to make a will. In fact, you don't need a notary. You don't need any type of official formalization. All you need are 2 witnesses and yourself. So if you don't get anything else from the remainder of what I will discuss, these 3 things are key. Because inshallah, with these 3 things, you will be set, inshallah. So I'll try this. There's a lot of details in this presentation that we have developed. For the purposes of tonight, considering what time it is, I'll try to keep it quick just to make sure that we cover the main points. As with anything to do with law, this is just legal information. So what I'm giving you now is information. It's not advice, meaning each person's situation is different. This is just information for you to go home and implement per your situation. So before we get started, I just want to make sure we go over a few key words because these words will appear throughout our discussion. The first is the word testator. And now for this presentation, each of you are a testator, meaning that you are all here to make a will. So the testator is ideally the person who is making the will. So in this situation, it would be each of you. And so the second word is executor. Now, an executor is after you pass away, who is in charge to administer your will? Right? You have a house. Who is going to be in charge of selling it? Right? You need to designate a person. And this is one of the most important decisions that you will have to make. Who will you choose to be your executor? Estate, I think we all know, is just everything that you own. So what all money, property, debt, that forms the basis of your estate. And a beneficiary is someone who will just quite simply benefit from your passing, right? Someone that will get something from your will. That's a beneficiary. So in our cases, it's most likely family members, right? So testator is you. Executor is the person that you choose to administer your will. The estate is everything that you own or owe. and the beneficiary is someone who will receive something from you. What is a will? I think we can pretty much skip this. It's basically a legal document that says what will happen to your belongings after you pass away. In Canada, it's called estate law. That's governed by each province. So what we talk about today is largely for Ontario. Someone's living outside of Ontario, they may need to readjust their will on the basis of their province's laws. Why do I need a will? Mufti Sahib talked a lot about the Islamic side of things. On the secular side of things, a will allows you to choose, right? You've worked your entire life to build what you own today. A will allows you to choose what you want to do with your wealth after you pass away. Things that are covered: real estate, bank accounts, investments. But it's also important to recognize what's not uncovered in your will, right? So for the purposes of this conversation, it's joint assets. So if you have a home or you have some item that you own jointly with someone else, most frequently it's you and your wife, right? If you own something jointly, in a joint ownership situation, if one person dies, everything else automatically goes to that other person. So if you have a home and you own it jointly, or it's joint ownership with your spouse, once you pass away, it doesn't go to your will. It will go directly to your spouse. So this is a very important distinction to remember, because as Mufti Sahib talked about, on the Islamic side of things, ownership is very important, right? So you have that discussion with your spouse. What's on paper is one thing, and what the understanding of what's happening in actuality is another. So it's very important that you recognize what is your portion of ownership. And the other thing, just basis on our society, is that designated assets, meaning like anything that you have to choose a beneficiary for. So if you're at work and say you have a pension, or if you have an RRSP, they usually ask, okay, who is your beneficiary, right? Like if you pass away, what's going to happen? The reason for that is that the money in those accounts, it doesn't go through your will. Once you pass away, it will automatically go to that beneficiary. So that's also something just to remember, that's not really included in your will. It may be yours, but after you pass away, it's not going to go to your will. It's going to go straight to that person. So, like I said, almost half, I think in our society, meaning that just South Asian or just the Muslim community, it's more than half the population that does not have a will. It's very common. It's something that we don't necessarily appreciate. And unfortunately, this is one of those things where when people, by the time someone realizes, it's too late, right? Most of the time, the problem arises when someone passes away and people come to us saying, this person passed away without a will. What do we do? And the answer is, it's not going to be easy, right? Because that person had the opportunity their entire life to create one or to prepare one, and they didn't do that. So you can't really get their wishes after they pass away. So it's very important to create a will. Otherwise, the law will govern, right? The law will tell you how much each person gets and how to distribute it. You'll have no say. And that's called intestacy, right? So if you pass away without a will, it's called intestacy. And just to give you an example, for example, one of us passes away and you have a spouse and a child. The law automatically has it. In Ontario, your spouse will get a preferential share, meaning $350,000 flat will just go right to your spouse. And then the balance will be divided between yourself and your children. So just think about that in the context of what Mufti Sahib talked about earlier, right? There, in Ontario, there's no distinction. There's no real like Allah's will. It's not contemplated. It's simply whatever's in the law, that's what's going to happen. So it will remain in your family. But in terms of your relationship with Allah and your duties to Allah, that will not be considered at all. Which is why it doesn't matter whether you have $10, whether you have $1 million. The need for a will is still present. So sometimes people ask, where can I access this will? The will kit. And quite simply, it's right on the SMA website. It's on the home page on the right-hand side, Islamic Will Kit. So if you click on that, it will take you to a PDF, print it out, and then through the course of the rest of the slides, we'll talk about how to basically complete it. So that way you're covered. It's right here. What makes a will? So what do you need in order to make a will? You need to be 18 years of age, first and foremost. Second, you need knowledge, right? You need to understand what you are doing. If you can't appreciate that I'm making a will to make sure this happens with my money, if you can't understand that, then the will not be valid, right? At the end of the day, you need something called mental capacity. You need to understand what you're doing. And lastly, you need to make sure that the proper formalities are done. In this case, we need just witnesses, right? If you don't have the proper witnesses, if they don't sign together, it could relate to problems down the line, and your entire will may be canceled by the courts. What you really need is just your full name and address. And the reason for address that people ask is that I think we all know probably like 10 Muhammad Patels, right? So in order to have that distinction, it's important to put another qualifier, another identifier. Usually an address is good enough. You'll need your executor's full name and address. If you have minor kids, you'll be able to select who's going to be in charge of your children after you pass away. So there's no real argument. And basically, you'll need the identity of the witnesses as well. So once we get into the actual will kit, and these screenshots are from the kit exact. So once you push that button on SMA's website, you'll get a full document with what's on the screen here. So we start with the preamble. It basically just talks about how I am a Muslim, and these beliefs are very important to me. The reason for this, it's not really in the will per se. It's not part of your will. But the reason why we include it is that after you pass away, if someone has an argument, be like, no, he didn't want that. We can always go back here and be like, you know what? What was important to him was his Islam, was his deen. And that provides context, right? All of this is just to give yourself a voice at a time where you may not be able to speak. Funeral and burial rights. In Ontario, this is not enforceable. Meaning, if I want my janazah to be here at Abu Bakr Masjid, the court, I cannot force someone to do it here as part of the will. But I can include it here so that way my children do not fight. So if my if my daughter lives in Mississauga and my son lives in Oshawa, and each of them are probably going to fight and be like, no, I want dad to be buried in Mississauga or Oshawa. Having it here ends the debate, right? It's like, no, he wrote it right here. This is what he wanted. So all of this works towards minimizing conflict at the end of the day. And now we get into the actual contents of the will. So like I said, it's very much fill in the blank, right? So in the first blank would be your name, full name, matching your passport or any other type of ID. In the second blank would be your address. And then in the chart here, and this keeps going, you'll be able to fill in the details of your family members. Why? Because it's very important to identify who your family is and who will be entitled to receive a share in your estate. The second part, and like I said, this is arguably one of the most important. This is where you will select an executor, meaning you're going to select the person who will be responsible for administering your will. So whatever you decide to do, whatever you decide to happen for your wealth, this is the person that's going to make it happen, inshallah, or that's going to be entrusted to make it happen. I think everyone knows what a power of attorney is, right? So if I cannot do something, I can give someone power of attorney. They can empty my bank accounts. They can sell my house. This essentially is a power of attorney after your death. Because any power of attorney you sign, it expires at death. It's no longer valid. But an executor has that exact same level of power after my death. So this is a very important decision. And in our will, we've created an alternative, right? So the first half is like your primary choice. Now, if for whatever reason they're unable or unwilling, we've included a secondary. So that way you do have a backup plan, you're able to choose. If they also say no, then your family's going to have to figure out who best to do that for you. Now, things to consider when choosing an executor, age, right? So if you have a son that's like 17, 18 years old, you may want to reconsider whether you want him to be your executor or find someone that's a little bit more mature. Because there is a little bit of discretion making, right? They're going to have to make decisions for you. So you want someone that's very responsible. Consent. It's a good thing to ask them first. Like, hey, assalamu alaikum, would you consider being an executor for my will? Because ultimately, this is a big responsibility. They will have to go to court. They're going to have to get the will registered. They're going to have to deal with banks. They're going to have to deal with perhaps selling the home or transferring title. So there is a lot of work involved. So it's always best to ask that person before you put their name down, like, is this something that you're willing to do? So that way it doesn't come as a surprise for them, right? After you pass away and they're like, oh, I now have to take care of all of this. I didn't know. So that you look at their skill set, right? If they can't speak English very well, they may not be the best choice as executor. Look at conflicts of interest. So if you know that your children have a little bit of conflict between them, they don't get along, it may not be the best idea to select one of them as executor, right? You may want to go outside of the family, so that way everything remains neutral. And location, right? So if your property is here, your bank accounts are here, it doesn't make much sense to select an executor that lives in India or lives in England, right? They should be close by, so that way they can manage all of your affairs. You can appoint a professional executor, meaning you can hire a lawyer or an accountant to do this for you, but it gets very expensive. So I would not recommend it. And instead, I would just put a lot of thought now into who I want to do this for me. There's also a section for minor children. So you'll get to choose, if I pass away and I have kids under 18, who will take care of my children, right? Who will be responsible for my children? Similarly, I mean, we have a backup. So we have the primary where you can appoint them, and then we have a secondary. We also have instructions as part of the will that, you know what, like whoever is responsible for my children, I want them to have like an Islamic upbringing, things like that. So that way it's very clear. And if this doesn't apply to you, you can simply leave it blank and move on. For minors, a question that often happens is what happens to the money that's owed to them, right? So if, say, I have a son that's 15 years old, it's not really a good idea to give them, say, $100,000 that's due to them. It's their money, but it's not always the smartest idea to give that to them lump sum at that age. So what will happen is that money will be held in trust. So it will be put into a separate account until they're the age of 18. So their caregivers will be able to withdraw from that account for expenses, right, related to them, but they themselves will not have access to that money until the age of 18. That's in the law itself, like in Ontario, it's not really something that we control. In fact, you can actually delay that date. If your view is that, you know what, 18 is too young, you can change that to be like, okay, he'll get that money at 21 or 25 or at marriage, right? So that trust you can adjust per your preference. For our purposes, for our will, the age is 18. Now, the main thing that makes a will Islamic, right? So people get a little bit tripped up when they hear the word Islamic will. The fact is, a will is pretty much the same everywhere. The difference is how we distribute wealth, right? Like Mufti Sahib said, Mufti Sahib gave us 4 categories of how we break it down in priority, right? So the first is payment of burial expenses. The second is the payment of debt, right? So these things are taken off from the top. Before anything else happens, expenses, debts, that's gone. After that, whatever's left over, you'll have 33.33% from there to determine how you want to distribute it, right? That's your choice, like Mufti Sahib mentioned. That is what you have discretion over. The remainder will be divided according to Quran and Sunnah. So we really don't have a choice for that remainder. Now, the way that this looks like in the will kit is basically broken down into priority, right? So we have strict instruction as to this is what happens first, this is what will happen second, and then everything that's left over, it will go to my heirs per Sharia. The first part is quite straightforward. Debts and expenses. It's basically just paying off whatever's due. The second part, where it gets discretionary, where you have choice, that's where it becomes a little tricky. So here in our kit, we've provided a little bit of a chart, right? So you can select a name or organization if you want to give some charity. You can stipulate the cash amount or item, right? Some people want to give jewelry, right? So you have that option here. But ultimately, it will all come down to whether it's worth 33.33%, right? Because that is the maximum that you're allowed to give. If you were to try and give 40%, that will automatically be caught back, 33.33. It will be distributed based on whoever you select here. And you can leave this blank. If you're like, nah, I'm fine with how it is, like the default, meaning in Quran and Sunnah, I'm fine with that. I just want my family to get whatever they're due. You can leave this blank. There's no problem. But this is just a way for you to choose what to do with your 1/3. And the remainder of everything that's left will be distributed via Sharia. And so in our will kit, we have maybe, I think, 5-6 pages of these types of charts, because this covers almost all potential scenarios, right? So on the screen is basically if you have one son or 0 or more daughters. So if you have basically kids, this will apply to you, right? And you'll look, okay, look, I also have my wife, right? The second line. So I have kids and I also have a wife that's still surviving, that continues on after I die. In that case, 1/8 will go to the wife, and the remainder as in 1/8, meaning that it will go as your son will get twice as much as the daughter, 2 shares, and your daughter will get 1 share. So it's not really necessary to go through this line by line. Mufti Sahib has done that for us. He's verified it and pretty much authorized it according to Sharia. The main thing is to recognize that this is there, and this really is what makes it Islamically compliant. And with that, we just get to our final page. And signing this page is what makes your will a will. It's what makes it valid. So all you'll need to do is put your name, your signature, and the date of when you sign. And you'll need to find 2 witnesses that are outside of the family. And the reason why I say outside of the family is that the main requirement for a witness is that they cannot stand to inherit under your will, because that creates a conflict of interest. So it's best not even to get extended family involved, because under Sharia law, if my entire family is on a plane together and that plane crashes, my uncles stand to inherit, my cousins may stand to inherit, right? It branches out into the family. So that possibility of them inheriting means they should not be a witness here. It should be outside of the family. All they need to do is provide their name, their signature, and everyone should be able to see each other signing. Meaning that if this is look, I'm signing this today, you need to see me sign, and then you can sign off as a witness. Mufti Sahib needs to see me sign, and then he signs off as a witness. So that way, there's proof, right? So if the purpose of having a witness, because if after I die, my children or anyone stands up and says that will is false, it's fake, a witness can come forward and be like, no, I was there on the day that he signed it. He knew what he was doing, and there was no issues. No one forced him to sign this will. A court will hear that, and the person who's creating the problem, they will not get anywhere, right? Just the court will honor what you've signed with your witnesses. Now, that pretty much is what makes a will. One important consideration whenever it comes to will planning is tax. So in Canada, almost everything is taxed, and your will is no exception. So the tax rate, it's called estate administration tax. So after you pass away, your executor needs to take your will to the court to have it validated. The court will take a look at what's in your will, all of the assets, the property, the bank accounts, and they will issue a certificate. But in order to issue that certificate, you need to pay tax first. So they're going to evaluate how much the value of your estate is. They'll collect tax on it. Then they'll give you the certificate so you can distribute everything. In Canada, it's 1.5%. So the first $50,000 is tax-free. After that, you'll be taxed at 1.5% for everything that you own. There are some exceptions. I don't think we have the time to get into that right now. That's a separate discussion. And there are things to do. I think at the beginning of the conversation, I mentioned joint ownership, right? Where if myself and my wife own a house together and I pass away, my share automatically goes to her, right? It doesn't go through the will, which means it's exempt from tax. These things you have to really be careful about, because sometimes when you try to avoid tax, it creates a bigger problem in the long run. So for the purposes of our will, it's just best to just go ahead and complete it without really trying to avoid tax. At the end of the day, I think the fact that you have something is enough for now. These are situations where it might be worth retaining an expert. And when I say expert, I am not that person. So if you come to me, I'm going to send you somewhere else. However, if you have a business, right, or corporate interests, it gets a little bit more complicated. If you have assets outside of Canada, if you have complicated family relations, right, if you know that there might be some problems after you pass away, it may be worth getting a lawyer to create a specific will for your situation. Again, these things are on a case-by-case basis. I've just highlighted them for you. So if they apply to you, you know that, I need a little bit more extra help. Like that SMA will kit may not be enough for my personal situation. And before we get on to questions, just a few quick reminders. Again, all you need, 2 witnesses and yourself. You can revoke your will at any time. Just because you signed a will today doesn't mean that you're stuck. You can always change it. You can always take it back. But it's best to do that in writing. And lastly, it's important to keep your will current, right? So everyone's life changes. You can have a child, issues in your marriage. It's always a good idea to revisit your will every few years, just to make sure that everything is accurate. Right? Mufti Saab gave an example of a situation where the previous marriage was dissolved, but the person didn't get a chance to update their will, which could lead to problems, right? So some reasons for why you might want to revisit your will would be a marriage, birth of a child, one of your executors, the people that you named as executor, has passed away or even moved away, so you need to replace them. You've bought a new house, right? Or you've acquired something that needs to be added into the will. Things like that. It's just good to be mindful of that. But I think that does it for my side of the presentation. I know it was a little bit quick, but alhamdulillah, that is the main parts of a will, right? So 1, it's very easy. It's not difficult at all. 2, you do not need a lawyer. You just need 2 witnesses, right? So inshallah, if all you take away are just those points, that will be enough. So now I think Mufti Saab and I will stick around for some questions. You're free to ask them.
Yeah, go ahead. You can ask him as well as myself if you have any questions.
Yeah.
Repeat the question.
Sorry? So, sorry, I'll just repeat the question. So the question was, if I made an update to my will, do I need to get the witness to sign? And the answer is yes. Why? Because whenever you make a change, we don't know if there's someone standing next to you with threatening you, right? Or forcing you to make that change. So the purpose of having a witness is so that they can see that, you know what, no one's forcing me to do this. I'm doing this of my own free will, and I recognize what I'm doing. So the answer would be yes. Sorry, I can't hear you. Yes. The question was, can the executor be my brother? It can be anyone, as long as you trust them. No, witness cannot be anyone in your family. Trust? I can't hear you, sorry.
Trust deed.
No, you don't. No, it's not required.
Yes. इंतकाल किसका हुआ? कब्जा करने वाले का, और जिससे कब्जा किया वो भी जिंदा है. The question was, if someone had unlawfully taken someone else's wealth or property in their lifetime, so they have it in their possession, and then they pass away, and the one from whom the wealth was taken, they're still alive, so obviously that's not part of their estate. जो कब्जा किया हुआ माल है वो उसकी विरासत नहीं है, उसके वारिसदार को हक नहीं है कि वो माल ले, बल्कि उनकी जिम्मेदारी है कि असल मालिक को वापस करे वो माल. The responsibility of the heirs is to return that property and wealth to the original owner. They are not allowed to distribute it in their inheritance. There could be a scenario where even they don't know. The heirs don't know that this wealth did not really belong to our father, and they took it and distributed it in inheritance. If a person doesn't know throughout their whole life, inshallah, they would not be held accountable because they don't know that they have distributed someone else's property. But if they come to know in their lifetime, they must return it wherever they come to know. There's no justification for keeping that wealth when they come to know that our family member, our father, had taken it from someone else unlawfully. They must return it. They don't have the right to keep that wealth. That answers the question.
The question was, is there any extra value if it goes through a lawyer? I would say yes. There's always value in retaining a professional to do it. Now, whether that value added is worth it for the money that you pay, that is a different question, right? And that will depend on your situation. I don't take this kind of work. I work actually at I work at a law firm, so we cannot take work on the side, right? Like this is different because I'm not charging for this, right? This is free, but to provide services, provide legal services, I can't do it outside of my firm.
There's a question here. I'm just going to read it out. There's also those who are listening online. They can post questions in the chat, in the YouTube chat. There's this question here that my mother and father are alive. My father wants to distribute his property, all his property. We are one brother and 4 sisters. How can we do it? We will get the property after he dies. If the father wants to distribute his property in his lifetime, we already spoke about this. This is considered to be a gift. He's not distributing his inheritance. His inheritance does not apply until he dies. After he dies, the laws of inheritance apply, not in one's lifetime. So if I have property and I want to distribute it amongst my children, I can do so, and they must receive equally. The brother and the sisters, they should receive equal shares. But in property, you have to actually, or anything else that is going to be distributed in his lifetime, for it to be a valid gift, they must take possession of it. So in other words, if it's a house, it must be given to them. If the parents are living in the home and they gift this house to their children, but they're still living in their home, in this home, it will not be a valid gift. Ownership Islamically will not be transferred. For ownership to be transferred, the one who is being given a gift must take possession of that gift, whatever way that gift can be taken possession of. If it's a property, a person will have to move out of that property and give it over to who he is gifting for it to be valid. So this individual was asking if the father wants to distribute this property in his lifetime, he would actually have to give them ownership and possession in his lifetime. Then they will become the owner and it will not be part of his estate. But if he wants the house to be distributed after he passes away, then he fills out this will. And he cannot do this in his lifetime. According to the will, Islamically, the son will get 2 shares of that property, and every sister, the 4th sister, will get 1 share. So the property will be distributed, divided into 6 shares. The house, after he passes away, will be divided into 6 shares. The brother will get 2 shares, and each sister will get 1 share each, 4 sisters. So that will be part of his will and estate. And he could make that will right now so that this is how it's distributed after he passes away. But like we said, in his lifetime, he actually handed over to them for it to be valid. Allahu A'lam. Yes. Yeah, so this was the will that's on the website that was distributed. You can download it and print it from there too. Yeah, there's not enough.
Sorry, the brother asked, does the will still need to go to through probate? So I'd mentioned probate earlier, but I really simplified it, right? So probate is the process of your executor, after you pass away, your will needs to go to a court for just the certification, right? So that entire process is called probate. So there is nothing you can do to avoid that process. And the reason why is because there needs to be a record, right? A government record made of your will, a copy of your will. So that way, the person who's the executor has the authority to go ahead and sell your house, to go ahead and liquidate your bank accounts, right? So that is a separate process after your passing that the executor will need to do. But in short, the word probate, whenever you hear probate, that's basically the process of your will being taken to a court for certification. Taxes will need to be paid on it, and then you'll get what's called a probate certificate. With that certificate, the executor can then handle, sell, manage all of your belongings. They will. So the question was, I mentioned earlier that the courts have the ability to dismiss or nullify a will. What is the test for that? So typically speaking, it goes on form. So what I mean by that is that if you didn't have 2 witnesses, then your will is deficient, right? One of the requirements of a will is 2 witnesses. If you don't have that, or if a witness is one of your beneficiaries, then the court can cancel the will altogether, being like, this is not valid. We can't verify this. Another reason is that if someone stands up and says, this will is not valid, someone forced him to make this will, or he didn't know what he was doing at the time that he made this will, then then it will become more of an investigation, right? The court will summon the witnesses. They'll look at the will itself to see if there's any indication of this person doing something that they didn't really want to do. So it wouldn't be automatic in that situation, but those are some of the examples where the court, because in Canada, a large sense is that you're allowed to do whatever you want with your will. How you distribute your assets is totally up to you, as long as you've done it properly in the sense that you've done it according to the law, meaning you have your 2 witnesses, and that you knew what you were doing. No one forced you to do it.
a simple change in your circumstances, would that cancel the will?
No. A change in your circumstances would not cancel your will, but it may be a good idea to update your will just so that you can readjust your wishes or your selections based on that change in circumstance. So the question was, can I fill in the will electronically, print it, and then sign it? The answer is yes. So the signatures, and even on the document, if you look, there's initials on each page. Those must be wet, meaning that they need to be done in ink, right? You can't do an e-signature. It's just best to do it wet signature, so everyone needs to be there. So we have a question online. Should a husband and wife make two separate wills? The answer is yes. So each individual needs their own will. Usually in households, it's like, okay, what's mine is yours, or there's no real delineation in ownership. But it is very important that each person has their own will because they are responsible for themselves. I think Mufti Sahib can speak on the Islamic side of things, but at the end of the day, I'm responsible for what I own, and my wife is responsible for what she owns, however much it might be, whether it be $1, whether it be $1 million. But so it is important that everyone has their own separate will. It could be the exact same thing, but it needs to be their signature, their name as the testator.
Yes, that's correct Islamically, that the wife is independently the owner of her wealth. The husband does not have ownership over the wife's wealth. Whatever she owns, whatever is hers, and when she passes away, inheritance will likewise apply to her estate, whatever she left behind. And the distribution differs. So the Quran speaks about this. If the husband passes away, then his estate will be that she gets this much, children. And then the Quran also says, if the wife passed away, then the husband will get this much of her wealth. The children will get this much. So yeah, that shows that they are independent owners of their wealth, and therefore inheritance is applicable to the wife's estate as well as the husband's estate, the mother and the father. Now, the last part was Ken? Yes. Okay, yeah, that's a common question, mashallah. And this is explicitly prohibited in Islam. The Prophet ﷺ said, La wasiyyata liwarith. That 1/3 he's speaking about, he's asking, can that 1/3 part can be given specifically to a child, for example, who's going to inherit already? So top up from that 1/3. No, you're not allowed to. You cannot make a wasiyat for someone who is already going to inherit from you, Islamically. You cannot include them in that 1/3. It must be someone who is not going to inherit. So in the will, no, you should not put anyone's name, immediate family member who's going to inherit or receiving any part of that 1/3. Now, there is a discussion of if the father wishes, for example. They know that the distribution is Islamic distribution is like this, but the father can verbally express to the other family members that, look, this daughter of mine, she's going to get this much after I pass away, but I would like her to get more. So the other heirs, for example, his sons, you should look into this. I would like her to get a greater share. After he passes away, the rest of the heirs can discuss it amongst themselves, and they have to willingly agree that we're ready to give her more than her share. And if they all are mature and they agree, then she could be given. But it cannot be part of the will. right, to direct the heirs or executor to give her more than what she would receive, or him, whoever it may be.
So the question was earlier in my part of the presentation, I mentioned that designated assets, meaning like your pension or your RRSP, accounts where they ask you who is your beneficiary to this account. That does not fall in the will. So the question was, how do we make sure that that is distributed according to Islamic rules of distribution? The answer to that would be an honest conversation with that specific beneficiary, because Ontario law will not compel that beneficiary to give it up, meaning to distribute it, right? So, for example, if my wife is listed as a beneficiary on my pension, I would need to talk to her and be like, listen, like this, just because it's not in my will doesn't mean it's not part of my estate, right? So if I pass away and you get all of this money, it still needs to be distributed according to the last section of my will. And whether she does it or not, I mean, we can't speak to that. In theory, yes, but you need to confirm with the manager of that account, meaning that will your employer allow it, right? Will the I guess the bank or whoever has that account, will they allow it? In theory, yes, because a trust is a separate legal entity, meaning that even after you pass away, a trust is still valid. It's still operating, right? It doesn't go through the will anymore. The trust will operate on its own. So it's very important for you to set up the trust to respect, I guess, the Sharia, the Islamic distribution of things, right? That responsibility will fall on you.
Question. Oh, go ahead, take it now.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah. So the question is, if I want to make a change just on one page, so if I complete the will, I get it signed off, and then maybe the next day even, I want to make a change. So the question is, do I need a brand new will or do I need those same witnesses? That becomes a little bit subjective. And when I say subjective, I mean there's no hard and fast rule as to what you must do. The safest option would be to create a new will, right? Because that leaves less people involved. So say you can't get the same witnesses again, it just becomes a little bit more messy, right? So the cleanest approach would be to create a brand new will with that update. Now, if you don't want to do that, you can literally scratch it out, sign it, date it, and then have two witnesses, ideally the same witnesses that are on the rest of the will, sign off on that specific change. But you can imagine that it will get messy, right? The more changes that you make.
So this, they're all separate pages. So just make the change. You're going to make a change on one page. So just discard that page and print that out separately. And
Yeah, don't do that. No, don't interchange it, because each page operates as a piece of the whole, right? So you don't want to mix and match, so to speak. Even though that page, in your sense, it's fine. I would recommend that you do it. If you're going to redo it, redo the entire thing. If not, then you keep the original page, but you scratch it out so that it's evident that, you know what, I made this change, but I did it with my own, like myself, with my signature, and the witnesses also witnessed that specific change. So the witnesses will sign the bottom of the page, or initial the bottom of the page initially, but then they'll also sign off on the change. Yeah.
yes.
close, yeah, next to the change, right? Sorry, one sec. The question is, in the will, should the witness sign each page? That's not a requirement. They don't need to even initial each page. We have done that for peace of mind, for continuity, right? Because it's a lengthy document. So we want to make sure that there is some type of recognition that everyone has basically verified the page and signed off on it.
Next one also. What happens in the case that both names that you have put down for executor are not able, for example, passed away, denied after your demise, take the will to court?
So the question is basically on I think page 3, we have to select an executor, right? We have to choose who's going to take care of my will. We have option 1, we have option 2. The question is, what if both of these people are unwilling or unable to handle the will? What happens then? Then the family will need to find someone. It can be within the family, it can be anyone, but someone will need to volunteer to do this and then take it to court. It doesn't have to be that same person listed, but it's better if it is, because you get to choose that person, right? If neither of the people that you choose are willing or able to do it, then you're in the hands of whoever else is left.
This is also related.
I don't know.
This is also related. Question is regarding executor, that can a witness be an executor, and can a beneficiary be an executor, or maybe both of them?
Yeah, so an executor can literally be anyone, age of 18. All right, and they should adhere to the slide that I had of like what to think about, right? They should speak English, they should be in the country, and they should be willing to do it. So as long as those are met, your executor can be anybody. So he's just asking for a reminder on what I meant by joint account, joint ownership. So it gets a little technical. There's 2 types of joint ownership. One is, they call it tenants in common. So what that means is that me and Mufti Saab own this bottle, right? And we cut it in half. Tenants in common means that if I pass away, my half stays in my family. So it will go down to my heirs. He will have his half, but my half will go down to my family. So that's one. Then there's joint ownership. Joint ownership means that it's still half, but when I pass away, whatever I owned, it goes straight to Mufti Saab, automatic. Like, it doesn't go through my will. There's no tax due on my half. So in your situation, assuming that it's your spouse, it's half for you, half for your spouse. Once you pass away, it will automatically go straight to your spouse. If it's in joint ownership, yes. I'll let Mufti Saab comment after, but my understanding is that it's yours, and you pass away. So just because they make you have a beneficiary and they send it, that doesn't automatically mean that it's that person's, right? It's still part of your estate. We know this, like, we have to recognize that it's still part of our estate, even though, like, even joint ownership, right? Just because I pass away and my half goes automatically to Mufti Saab, I'm still responsible for my half, even though he gets it, right? Similar to my spouse, like that half is still mine, and it should be funneled through. He can keep it. And under Canadian law, he can keep it, right? There's nothing compelling him. Yeah, because
so we have to understand that, I mean, in this joint ownership, joint bank accounts, and the beneficiary funds that are received, when the person passes away, his half share, although the other spouse will become the owner of it, Islamically they're not. Legally, they're the owner of the whole house. But they should know, based on our understanding of Islamic rulings, that if, for example, the wife passed away, the husband will become the sole owner of the house, but he should know that my wife owned half the house. That's her inheritance. And Islamically, I will only get from her half of the house, if I had children, 25%.
No.
It's yours. No, no. So legally, so this is where we must also speak to our families. There may be certain matters where legally you might become the owner of the whole house, but you should know half of the house belongs to the shareholders. So they should be notified, right? Even though, for example, the husband becomes the sole owner of the whole house, he should notify his children that the half that your mother owned, that half is her inheritance. I get this much from that half. You get this much, yours is this much, and their ownership should be known that this much percent is yours. Although legally I have the house, it's in my name, but you are the owner of it, whatever your share may be. So likewise, beneficiaries who receive these funds after one of the two pass away, that's part of the inheritance in most cases. In some scenarios, I believe, they're considered to be like a grant or an assistance from the company or whoever's providing that benefit to the surviving spouse. Then it will be exclusively theirs. But in most scenarios, it's savings that are paid out. That would be part of their inheritance too. So even though they get all of it, they should know that inheritance applies to this too. And it's their responsibility now to give it to the Islamic shareholders, right? Whatever they have to. Legally, you can't. Well, he said legally, he'll tell you.
Yeah. So whenever, for example, you buy a house, your real estate lawyer should. Yeah, yeah. But I'm just giving you an example. Like, so whenever you buy a house, your real estate lawyer should ask you, is this joint ownership or is this tenants in common? Right? And so for other types of accounts, there should be some type of record. Like you should even consider talking to your bank, right? Like who is that distinction is important, right? And it's on you to have the appropriate documentation for that. Yeah. Mhm. That's right. Hmm. Sorry. Both witnesses. Yeah. Good question. Yeah. So the only time an issue comes up if someone brings up an issue, right? So if someone after your passing is like, no, no, like this is impossible. This is something wrong here. That's the only time where there might be some problem. Otherwise, your witnesses won't even be called, right? If there's no issue, there's no sense of issue, no one's gonna ask any questions. They're just okay. This is the document. All right, stamp next. But if someone's like, wait a second, like hey, this is not right, then they'll start inquiring. And if both your witnesses, yeah, if both your witnesses are not around, they'll have to conduct more of an inquiry. Like there's things as like handwriting analysis to make sure that you signed it. Like there are other ways that they'll have to investigate to make sure that this was actually your will. Now that you've mentioned it, another tool that's sometimes used is that once a witness is signed, you can get an affidavit from them. So they'll sign as a witness, and then right away you'll have a separate document which is called an affidavit to say that yes, I was there on the day that I signed his will as a witness. So that way, even if he dies, that affidavit is there. That's a little bit like not. I don't want to use it extra. Sorry, I don't want to use the word extreme, but that is something that you can do. Sorry, I believe this. One second. Sorry, before I,
We mentioned that. That's possible. Yes, of course. Yes. Oh, you want to talk about legally? Islamically, like you could distribute your wealth in your lifetime. Again, as long as you
Yeah.
don't abuse someone in your distribution, you're not doing it to deprive someone who might inherit. Some people do this. They will give everything, for example, to one child because they don't want the other children to get it. This is not allowed. A person will be held accountable. But if they don't want, for example, their estate to be extensive, to be distributed after their death, and they want to distribute it in their lifetime, they could do so, right? So that there are very little complications after one's death.
No, if you're so a will doesn't take effect until after you die. Only when you die. Now you just sell whatever you want and give to whoever you. If you want to give it to them, then you add their name to the property. Yeah. You add their name, you give them ownership, and that's it. Okay.
مرة أخرى. Yes. Yes. Joint account. The other spouse, they will assume the account. So legally, like he's saying, she will get everything in the account. But she has to understand that Islamically, half was my husband's who passed away. So I should give it to the heirs. I don't keep it myself. Right? So that's her responsibility now. Although everything will go to her, and then she should, so that this much was his estate, this much was his in the account. So from that, this is his mirath. I get this much according to Islam, and the rest my children will get, so give it out to them. No. Oh, divorce. Well, it's another issue then. If she's divorced, so Islamically, after she's divorced, outside of her iddah, she will not inherit from the ex-husband. Yeah, you have to obviously determine now, after the husband passes away, who's an ex, that she's not going to inherit, even though she might legally be on the account with him. She will get everything, but she must understand that this should be given to the inheritors, Islamic, and I do not inherit. So she should give the whole share to whoever is legally the heir, Islamically. Same thing. Yeah, he cannot inherit from her, but the money should be given to her inheritors, her children, and whoever will inherit Islamically. She passed away. No, not to him. Mm.
No. Matrimonial home is a designation to live in. It doesn't have to do with the ownership. Meaning that if your parents owned a home, right? Your parents own that house, but you and your wife live there. So it becomes a matrimonial home because you guys live there. But that's only to the extent that you're alive. After that, yeah, because it's still your parents, right? The matrimonial home and ownership are two different things.
If there are no inheritors, and like the inheritors, not just immediate relatives, even extended relatives, If there are no immediate relatives like children, brothers or sisters, mother or father, then sometimes uncles and aunts, sometimes cousins, cousins' children. There's a very elaborate distribution. If no one exists, then that one third allocation may be extended to the rest. It's like when there are no Islamic heirs that exist for this individual. We have some cases like this. Like a lot of times, new Muslims, this happens to them, right? There are no immediate or extended relatives that inherit because of not Islam. So they could make a wasiyat for their whole estate, right? And it would be distributed accordingly. So they should decide that. And if they know that there's no one going to inherit from them, then they could allocate the whole 100% of their estate to whoever they wish. No, he can't, because they will inherit from him. When they have children. So if there's only one daughter, then there is further distribution to the brothers and sisters. Yeah, I mean, the exact, you would have to um, mention that exact scenario and the calculation has to be worked out. But the daughter will not get everything if she's only one. If there's two or more, then the distribution is increased. Yes, you could give everything.
One sec. Ah, वो गवर्नमेंट का हिसाब से डिस्ट्रीब्यूट हो जाएगा. विल नहीं हुए ना तो गवर्नमेंट का हिसाब से सब सब डिस्ट्रीब्यूट होता है. आप विल बनाया तो आप आपका मर्जी से सब होता है. हाँ, वो गवर्नमेंट डिसाइड करेगा. नहीं नहीं, ले तो नहीं लेगी. वो आपकी फैमिली में ही रहेगा, लेकिन गवर्नमेंट का हिसाब से सब पीसेस करके दे देंगे.
तो ये भी एक अहम मसला है कि अगर ऐसा ऐसी कोई सूरत है तो हुकूमत तो तकसीम करेगी अपने हिसाब से, लेकिन घर वालों की जिम्मेदारी फिर रहती है कि इस्लामी हिसाब से तकसीम हो. ले ले, जो भी गवर्नमेंट दे दे, उसके बाद मालूम कर ले कि मेरा हिस्सा कितना है शरअन, और उस हिसाब से फिर आपस में तकसीम करें. उनके लिए जायज़ नहीं है कि हुकूमत ने मुझे आधा दे दिया तो मैं पूरा आधा ही ले लूँ. ये उनके लिए जायज़ नहीं है.
Sorry, one
We're going
second.
to stop at 10 o'clock,
Yeah,
inshallah.
go ahead.
We have to put a cut off. This equal distribution is only for the children, because you can't be unfair with the children. If you don't want to give to the children, you give to your brother, your sister, your mother, father, wife. That's allowed. It's your wealth as long as you're using it appropriately. You're helping people with it. Does not apply. Yeah, children, meaning fair. You have to be fair with the children. Yes. This one. Yes, yeah, to make things clear so that ownership is separated and distinguished, so that you don't run into this issue. That would probably be a better option Islamically, to keep accounts separate if there is a possibility. Hopefully, we don't assume this, right? We hope that the spouses trust one another, that they will not take what doesn't belong to them. But this is becoming a more and more common scenario, right? In these joint situations, that because it's automatically allocated to the other individual, the other spouse, there's no question about its Islamic distribution now. It's just like automatically assumed to be theirs. So in this scenario, it might be more, uh, there might be greater precaution, right? Maybe more cautious to separate these accounts Islamically, so that a person, if in their lifetime they could have done this, then they should do this, so that they're not held responsible. Why did you keep it together? This made it possible for the other party to take what didn't belong to them.
Everything can be challenged. In the situation that you provided, your degree of ownership will be challenged, not the actual will, right? So a will is more like your intention of what should happen. This is an issue of fact, meaning how much I owned of this object is a question of fact. It's not really my intention. So that's a separate analysis, separate issue. The only thing I'll mention, just in terms of joint ownership, just so that everyone's aware, Islamically, it's cleaner to have separate accounts because each person is accountable for just what they owned, right? And that way you can distribute accordingly. In our society, if you have a joint account or joint ownership, that's one tool to avoid taxation. Because when you have a joint account or joint ownership, it doesn't go through the will anymore, right? It automatically goes to the other person. So that way you avoid tax. So I think
Double-sided.
it's double-sided, and that's why communication is very important, right? If you feel that the person on the other side is understanding and you trust them, be like, listen, when I pass away, you'll get this money. We'll avoid tax, but you need to distribute it according to the will or according to my heirs. You trust that person, joint ownership might be better because at the end of the day, the people that you love will get more. But if you have
Especially
concerns,
if it's like a house, for example, something that's very valuable. If you avoid if you avoid that going through taxation, that would be an extra greater benefit for the heirs. So it's
so this is just knowledge for you to apply in your personal situation, right? Probate tax. Probate tax is different. If it goes through their will, yeah, everything's probate tax. It goes through anything through your will get taxed. Not having a will. It's like the biggest mistake. So the question was, if you have a house on a mortgage, how can you manage that Islamically and through the will? It becomes complicated. The reason why it becomes complicated is when you have a house on a mortgage, the bank has a stake in your house, right? Like that mortgage is not simply a loan, it's not a debt, right? It's not simply a debt. Why? Because it's secured with your house. So now the question will become, can you make the payments on that mortgage? If you can, then you'll continue to have ownership of the house and everyone will get their shares. If you cannot, then the bank will obviously foreclose. You'll have to sell the house. The bank will take what's theirs, meaning whatever portion is left on the mortgage, they will take theirs. And then the balance, you'll still get that cash, and that will be distributed based on the will.
Yes. So one is division, is one is ownership. After the father passes away, the ownership is uh, unquestionable. Right? Automatically, the Islamic heirs will become the owners of their shares. The sons, the daughters, whoever is living from the family that inherits. There's no question about that. And that's, you can't negotiate that. Or even if the children say, we want to give everything to our mother, that's not allowed. They would have to actually take possession, and then if they wish to gift it to their mother, they could do that. This is why we spoke about the forced ownership. But yes, they could delay the distribution. They could agree that we understand that we have a share in this house, but we're not going to distribute it until our mother is alive. And they could delay the distribution until the mother passes away and then have it liquidated and distributed. That's fine. If they are joint owners, it would automatically go to her or him. Yes.
Yeah. So I pass away, it will go through my will. And then whatever she has, after she passes away, it will go through her will.
No, so that's for legal purposes, right? To write that in your will. But Islamically, they should know, the children, that we are owners of this house too, according to our shares, but we're leaving it until the mother is alive, and then after she passes, we're going to distribute it. We're not going to distribute it until then. So there should be an understanding Islamically amongst them who is the true owner of the house. It shouldn't be that after the father passes away, the mother owns the whole house. Legally, she could be on her name according to the will, but Islamically, there's an understanding that we own it, but we're not going to take our share until the time comes.
We'll just take two more. Sorry, brother. So in the will, there's a chart of like family, right? So in that particular situation, I would just add their name into that chart and sign and get the witnesses to sign that. Yeah.
We're going to quickly take these questions. Hold on. Can I make wills for my RRSP although my beneficiary is my wife and kids?
You can always make a will, but like I said, the RRSP is going to go to the beneficiary. So you can put it in your will. It will not take effect, right? Because at the end of the day, it will go to your beneficiary.
There's another question. In situations where a person owns land back home and they wish to sell it now, how will distribution work if you have 3 daughters and 3 sons? Will it be divided by Islamic laws or 6 equal parts? Not sure if they are saying that the owner, if their owner is still alive and they have land back home, it's going to be sold. That's their money. That will also be part of their estate if they pass away. But if they're alive, they can do what they want with that money. They don't have to give it to their children. They could give it in charity, or they could give to their children. If they want to give it to their children, they should give equally, like we mentioned. If they have 3 sons and 3 daughters, 6 equal parts, unless they want to give one of them more for some specific reason. They should seek guidance about that. But it's their money as long as they're alive, even if this land was sold. One thing come to mind in relation to this question. A lot of times, children, they enforce on their parents while they're still alive to hand over their property according to the inheritance distribution. Like they try to express that I'm entitled to this because I'm going to inherit from you
In advance.
in advance. This is what the children give the impression to their parents. Like, for example, if the father has extensive property, the children will not allow him to do anything with that property because they say, no, we're going to inherit from you. This land belongs to me now. They give this impression that because I'm your inheritor, it's mine. So you can't do anything with it. You can't sell it. It's going to be mine. You have to leave it until you die, and then I'm going to get it. in one's lifetime, for example, in the parents' lifetime, the children have no right to the parents' wealth. They cannot claim any entitlement of that wealth while the parents are alive. The parents can do what they want with that wealth. It's only after the parents die that a person becomes entitled. But sometimes children, they show that entitlement while the parents are still alive. They show that. This is one of the reasons, a side note, that sometimes if, for example, the wife passes away, the father is still alive, the children and the family members don't allow the father to get married again. This is in our community, Gujarati community. They don't allow the father to get married again. Why? Because if he gets married, there's going to be a new mother, stepmother, wife, she's going to inherit. And we don't want anyone else to get inheritance, so they don't allow him to get married. You have to stay single. He suffers. I have multiple scenarios of this. The poor man is suffering all his life. The family members are not allowing him to get married because they fear that his estate is going to go to someone else. So this is greed of this money, right? And Allah will hold such people accountable, right? And they should not fear that if someone else is going to come, she's going to get her rightful share. Allah is going to give it to them. They will get whatever they receive after he passes away. Allah will bless them. But these issues occur. So sometimes the children commit these violations of entitlement even before the parents pass away, which is inappropriate and not allowed.
Answer that. Sorry, can be also. Digitally. No. No. Yeah. No. Yeah. They can be anyone as long as they're over 18 and not part of your family, not stand to inherit. But just because you mentioned it, I would not suggest you get someone that lives outside. Because if something happens or there's an issue or they're needed, they're outside of Canada, right? Like they're going to have to come all the way here. They have to testify about signing your document, right? Or being a witness. So ideally, you want a witness that's relatively close by in the province, above the age of 18, and just not related to you in any way. Technically, no.
So we'll take one last question from here and one last question we'll read out and we'll have to wrap up.
No. You don't need a lawyer. 2 witnesses. Anyone.
This was discussed before. It doesn't have to be in front of a lawyer.
Yeah. Lawyer ka zarur nahi hai. That's it. Good question. So the question is who should get the original copies of the will? So another tip that I sometimes give is that when you bring your witnesses to sign off, right? You're going to invite people, whoever your witnesses are, to sign off. I suggest making 2 originals. The exact same will, have 2 copies. Make them sign both. They're both the exact same. They're both signed on the same date, but now you have 2 original copies. So a good point of practice is, 1, to keep yourself somewhere safe. 1's all you need, but the second one is good to have. So you put it somewhere safe, but you need to tell someone where you put it. Why? Because that document needs to be accessible. So some people have safes at home. Some people have a safety deposit box. The recommendation is that you tell at least your family, like, listen, if anything happens to me, my will is here. They don't need to see it at that time, but they need to know where it is. But that second copy, I mean, you can give it to your executor if you want, or you can keep it anywhere. But it is very important that you hold on to the original, because it's the original that's going to hold value at the end of the day. Photocopies, no one's going to care about that.
Question, that can a witness be an executor and can a beneficiary be an executor? Or maybe both of them?
Yeah, we answered that.
As that was answered too.
Yeah.
طيب, inshallah. We'll wrap up. We'll make a short dua. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our gathering here. May this be the means of us dealing with our wealth appropriately in a manner that Allah does not hold us accountable in any way. May Allah forgive us for any misappropriation of our wealth. May Allah make it easy for us to fulfill this obligation of our religion, right, in relation to our inheritance. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. اللهم لك الحمد بالإيمان ولك الحمد بالإسلام ولك الحمد بالقرآن ولك الحمد بالأهل والمال والمعافاة. اللهم لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. يا رب صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. اللهم وفقنا لما تحب وترضى من القول والعمل والفعل والنية والهدى، إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم أصلح لنا شأننا كله. اللهم لا تكلنا إلى أنفسنا طرفة عين. اللهم لا تنزع منا صالح ما أعطيتنا. اللهم إنا نسألك من صالح ما تؤتي الناس من المال والأهل والولد غير ضال ولا مضل. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم، وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. وصل اللهم وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك.